Well, we're sort of kind of outside today. The weather finally warmed up. We got the door open. The wind blew the shop full of leaves, so it's just like being outside. Decided to work on the gas tank a little bit. Somewhere along the line, I think somebody backed into something and put a big dent in the gas tank here. And after that, somebody had the bright idea to just fill the dent full of Bondo. So there was a big lump of Bondo in here, and it just popped off. So now what we've done, we ground this all down, and we're trying to use the stud gun to pull this dent out. Got a pretty good dent in it. I don't know how much of it we're going to be able to get out. We've already got a couple of uh-ohs here where the stud pulled out of the metal, so we're going to have to weld those up when we get done and hope they don't leak. But we were trying to use the large stud, and just didn't seem to work as well as the medium-sized stud. So we've already done a few of them, and we'll go ahead and cut them off and ground them down, get them out of the way. What you got to be careful of is you don't just end up with a bunch of lumps or high spots where the stud's pulled. So you can only pull so much, and then you've got to move on. And the other point is you got to kind of knock that crown down at the same time. But it's a pretty good dent right in here, and the problem is that I can't really get the stud gun down in there in the middle of that dent to weld the stud properly. So we'll see what we can do. Give it a shot. Hey, worst case scenario, we'll just fill it up with Bondo like the last guy. Now, it's a shame, you know, people go to all the trouble to make this stuff. They make the stud gun, they make everything, and sell you this slide hammer. And the slide hammer is worthless. They have this little gear here, a little wheel that's got teeth in it. And the idea is that you slide it over there and then roll the teeth around, and the teeth are supposed to lock in there and grab a hold of the stud, and that's how you pull the dent out. Well, after you use it a few times, the teeth are gone from the little wheel and the whole thing is useless. So what we did is went and drilled a couple of holes in the side of the jaw so that we can tighten a couple of set screws up against the pin, and hopefully we can get the thing to work like it's supposed to work instead of throwing it in the big round bin. You got to be real careful here not to let the hammer hang on the pin. You don't want to pull it off, but we'll tighten these screws up and then we'll give it a couple of whacks and see what happens. You can only give it a couple of hard pulls. If you get pulling on it too much, then you end up with a hole in it like we did down here. So those we'll have to weld up. But it's just a game of not even inches, just a little bit at a time. And we did pull that out a little bit, so that's all it takes, just a little bit at a time. We might try one more on there, maybe one down here. See if we can get as much of that dent as possible out. Kind of a pain to have to do this, but you got to do what you got to do to make things work. Couple of whacks there. Doesn't take much. Then what we have to do is grind these pins off, cut them off, and then take and sand it all down with the sander nice and smooth. Need to put a muffler on that air compressor. But, you know, it's not perfect. And we're still going to have to put a little Bondo in here. There's a couple of places along in here where you can't really get in to weld a stud because of this flange. So at some point you got to quit while you're ahead. And we'll put a little filler in there. And I think that'll be good as new after we weld these holes up. You go along, you got to make sure when you're pulling that you also knock the crown down. There'll be a little crown there. You want to knock it down a little bit. And that's a whole lot better than it was. Let's put it that way. Instead of a ½ inch of Bondo, it'll just take a light layer in here in the edge, and it'll finish out well. So on to the next project.